Welcome to Get to the Hook. I am one of your hosts, Charles Latibeaudiere.
I am Eric Colley, your other host.
Yes, Get to the Hook, a podcast about pirates. No, it's not actually about pirates. It's about, although
there's a little plundering going on in this episode.
There is some plundering that's going on. This is, look, our podcast is about music, and it is about big events happening in music. And every episode, we're going to give you some relevant facts, trivia, and just cool information
and the big
about
picture.
The topic. Right.
All this stuff is connected.
It's all connected. So like we said, there is some plundering in this week's episode because we are talking about when is a song a ripoff? When is it copyright infringement? When is it just inspired by something else and that's totally legal? The short answer is nobody freaking knows.
Yeah, they make it up as they go along.
Nobody
knows. We'll see that the evolution of the big music lawsuit has evolved over time.
Some of the biggest names in music have fallen victim to this. Some of them have sued, some haven't, some didn't care, but they've all dealt with it. And like you said, Eric, it is actually, these cases have changed music because when you go in the studio, now you got to be worried. You can't just record anything willy-nilly because someone might come after you. Or maybe you do and you just don't care and that's the cost of business.
Yeah, some people you do. If you get deep enough pockets, what's 20 grand if you're selling 10 million records?
Which might be the case, and the reason that we're doing this episode is because of Kanye West, who has been sued by Donna Summer's estate over a song that is on his new Vultures album, or at least it was when the album first dropped.
You can't get it now.
And then it disappeared, which to me makes it seem like Kanye is admitting, okay, we did something wrong.
Right. There's a song called Good Don't Die. It was on Vultures. And it has a sample, an interpolation, an obvious nod to Donna Summer's classic I Feel Love. And Donna Summer's estate said that Kanye reached out weeks before the album was released, because that's how Kanye does business, wanting to clear the sample, and they said no.
So that's it. You asked. This is the problem with when you ask and someone says no, well then that's it. You can't do it.
Easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
However, he did use it.
He did use it, and the estate is saying it's not her recording. So they say, we don't know if he had somebody else re-sing it or if he used AI, which is entirely possible.
Right.
And so they're like, either way, it's still
based on her recording.
It is I Feel Love by Donna Summer. And this will be really interesting. As I said, the ones we're going to look at today are ones that in some way or another transformed music, really, and how people do business. This one going forward, we don't know if it's going to go to court yet, exactly what's going to happen with this. But if it is AI and they do sue, this will set a precedent for a lot of things that are,
right.
It's a giant snowball coming down the mountain right now with AI. So this will maybe set up how people, operate in this space going forward.
Right. So a Kanye case that will be, we don't know how that one's going to turn out, but we do know how some others turned out that really were transformative in different ways in music.
The first one we're going to look at, it goes back to the beginning of the rock era with one of the actual inventors of rock and roll, Chuck Berry. This one never made it to court, but there's a whole weird thing with this one. His song Sweet Little 16 was completely repurposed to become Surfin' USA by the Beach Boys. And it's not even a secret. Like, listen to these two songs.
They're really rocking in Boston and Pittsburgh, PA. If everybody had an ocean across the USA.
And Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys acknowledged that he heard Sweet Little 16 and
decided,
thought, I'm going to make a surf version of that.
Right.
And
which is exactly what you hear. I was going to say, like, it's the same song. You just put the instrumentation, makes it more
made
surfy.
His version of it. Yeah.
Right.
And so initially, this was the early 60s. Chuck Berry's song had come out in the late 50s. So the Beach Boys just put it out. Brian Wilson is the only credited songwriter on the song. And Arc Music was the publisher for Chuck Berry. And they're like, oh, no.
You can't just
do that. But nobody knew this was,
right.
Rock itself was only a few years old at that point. So the original, when the song first came out, Brian Wilson was listed as the sole songwriter. Brian Wilson's dad, Murray, who was also his manager, makes this deal with Arc Music Publishing. And then the song appears on Greatest Hits albums being solely credited to Chuck Berry.
Only Chuck Berry.
Which is also not right because he didn't write any of the lyrics to Surfin' USA.
Right.
So eventually, if you look now, the song is officially credited to both of them. But the interesting thing is that Arc Music Publishing still owns the publishing rights to Surfin' USA.
Surfin' USA.
That was the deal they made. They never went to court, but it was just like, hey, we'll give you the publishing. You let us keep the song.
And you know what is really unique about this case? this is a case where that a white person did not get away with stealing from the black artist.
From one of the
Which
founders of
doesn't
rock and
happen
roll.
all the
Those guys
time.
got ripped off all the time.
Right.
And
It doesn't happen all the time. Good for you, Chuck Berry.
And maybe that's why they thought they could because that's just what you did then.
Yeah.
If a black person did something, you just took it.
You just took it.
That's how it happened.
Right? Nobody ever sued Elvis.
This time, no. It wasn't. It didn't make it to court, but it did set a precedent that you can't just. And it was as close as you could get to a sample back then. Basically, like they just took the music track, replayed their own version of it, put new lyrics. It got a little more complicated in the early '70s with one of the most successful musicians of all time. And this proves anybody can be accused of this and found guilty of it.
And I think this one is so interesting. George Harrison.
They invented a ruling for this, basically.
Yeah.
So George Harrison, right after the Beatles break up, comes out with the song My Sweet Lord, shoots to #1. He's the first solo Beatle to get to #1, actually.
As much as people want to slight George Harrison,
he was first. And
as a
also,
solo.
fun fact, the last. When his song Got My Mind Set on You hit #1 in '88, he was the first and last Beatle to hit #1 solo. So good for George.
All right.
So
Good
My Sweet
bookend.
Lord comes out end of 1970, tops the chart for 4 weeks, and then a publisher called Bright Music, who owned the rights to the early '60s hit He's So Fine by the Chiffons, which had also been a #1 hit. This is not some obscure track nobody knew.
Right.
They pointed out this is exactly the same melody. So this is just a little bit of what these two songs sounded like.
He's so fine. Wish you were mine. My sweet Lord. My Lord.
The thing on this one, if you don't hear it so obviously right there, even though it's the exact same melody, the pre-chorus, the bridges, every element of He's So Fine
Matches up.
is in My Sweet
It
Lord.
just seems like a slightly different tempo.
It's a little, different enough that you wouldn't
Right.
necessarily right away unless you're the publishers. But when you look at it, you can actually take the lyrics, the vocals of My Sweet Lord and put them over the instrumental of
Yes,
He's So
I've
Fine.
actually seen some of those.
And it will
mashups
match
on-
up almost
on the internet,
perfectly.
yeah.
So this goes to court. Bright Music Publishing sues George Harrison. From the time this first started to when it finally ended was almost 30 years. This lawsuit took.
Well, because the ruling is
It got real weird.
something I had never heard of before or
Right.
since.
Subconscious plagiarism. So when they sue, it goes to court, and the judge, his name was Richard Owens. Obviously, it's George Harrison. You're a Beatle. You know how to write a song.
Right.
So what he said in his ruling was, did Harrison deliberately use the music of He's So Fine? I do not believe he did so deliberately. Nevertheless, it is clear that My Sweet Lord is the very same song as He's So Fine with different words, and Harrison had access to He's So Fine. Meaning, basically, this is not some obscure song.
Right. You've heard this song, George.
You know this song, and he admitted that. So the judge goes, this is, under the law, infringement of copyright and is no less so even though subconsciously accomplished. So what he meant was, probably when George Harrison was writing My Sweet Lord, as he's writing, he's like, oh, this sounds good. Because in the back of his head,
He's heard that melody.
He's heard it.
And maybe even liked it.
yeah, and
Right.
it's He's So Fine. And then George sort of acknowledged this in his book, I Me Mine, years later. He just said, why didn't I realize? And John Lennon kind of didn't really defend him very much later. John was like, he's more clever than that. Like,
Right.
if you were going to steal it, you would have just changed a note
Right.
here and there.
Exactly.
You would know to change it.
So he's acknowledging it probably was exactly what the judge said it was.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's what happened.
So, see, this is the problem when you have a ruling like that. Now, if you're a musician, you go like, well, wait a second. Of course I hear music. And you have to be mindful that you haven't heard that particular melody.
Yeah.
Those 3 notes or whatever you're writing, that you haven't heard those before.
And it's almost impossible for it not to already exist. At this point, music's been around for centuries. Modern pop music's been around for close to a century at this
Right.
point. It's hard to reinvent the wheel every single time. But this one, it wasn't just like a little bit here and there. There were giant chunks of the
Chunks
George
that were
Harrison
the
song.
same. So what did it end up costing him?
It cost him $1.6 million, which is about 75% of the royalties. He did not make most of the money on that.
Right.
And a quick side note to where this one got so messy. So the final decision, like I said, it started in 1971, right after My Sweet Lord came out. The final verdict from that judge was in 1976. The thing that made it last roughly until the late 90s, in 98 it finally resolved. Harrison's former manager, Alan Klein, who was a Beatles manager, when this case started, his initial reaction was, I'll just go buy the catalog of Bright Music Publishing, who owned He's So Fine.
Right.
Taken care of. Now we own it. I
Right.
can clear it. They didn't want to sell it. But then eventually, Alan Klein did buy that catalog, and he kept finding new lawsuits against George Harrison. So it just became this ongoing nightmare for literally almost 30 years.
Wow. All right.
But the final thing
Subconscious.
George said about it, he goes, "I don't feel guilty or bad about it. In fact, my sweet Lord saved many a heroin addict's life. I know the motive behind writing the song in the first place, and its effect far exceeded the legal hassle." So to him, it was worth it.
Right. And
Because also financially, he was fine.
he was fine. He didn't find the 1.6 million as royalties that he wasn't going to have any. And it sounds like he was more into the
Well-
actual reason he was writing the song.
And that's why he said in his mind, it didn't really dawn on him it was the same melody because the themes of the songs are so completely different. The other one's just, he's so fine.
Right.
It doesn't get much deeper than the
silly,
title.
silly
Yeah, it's a
love
cute
song.
early
pardon the
60s girl
phrase.
group song. His song was about meditations on faith and belief and inspiration and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
In his mind, he's not thinking, I'm writing a girl group song from 1963.
All
But
right.
he did, and
Yeah.
he lost a lot of money. The next two I want to talk about, these are the two most ridiculous. Some of these are really profound lawsuits. Some of them are just profoundly stupid.
There's a saying, we say this often on TMZ, you can sue, anybody can sue for anything. Doesn't
And
mean
they
you're-
will.
Doesn't mean you're going to win, but you can try it. And and there were some people who tried to file. I agree with you. These are okay. We'll just say it because I don't know how a lawyer, when
They're dumb.
someone brought this to them, didn't go like, "Get out of my office." Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Come on.
If I was a judge, I would throw this out, but these made it to court. Well, one did anyway. One artist sued for sounding too much like himself. The other one was sued for not sounding enough like himself.
The second one, if you're a label, maybe I could understand that. Maybe, but
It was a dumb
Whatever.
lawsuit, but I get it. So the first one, Creedence Clearwater Revival, one of the biggest bands of the late 60s and early 70s, hit after hit after hit. John Fogerty is the lead singer,
Mhm.
lead songwriter. He was
Right.
basically the main guy behind Creedence. So he wants to go solo, but he has a contract with Fantasy Records. That was their label. This guy, Saul Zanitz, ran it. So he made a deal that he would give them his Creedence publishing if they would just let him go.
let him out of the contract. Okay.
And he did. So
He probably, and by the way, John was probably thinking, good. He probably thought, I got the upper hand on that.
Right.
Yeah, they can have it, but I'm going to go have a solo career. I'm going to make lots of more music, and I'll have that. So good deal for me.
Right, and he still gets paid his royalties as the songwriter and singer and performer.
Right.
He wasn't giving all that up, just he doesn't own the songs themselves,
Right.
which back then a lot of people didn't think about that. So solo career's going all right. His one big top 10 hit as a solo artist in 85 was a song called The Old Man Down the Road. You remember that song?
I do remember the song.
So Fantasy Records, who still owns the publishing to Creedence, sues him saying that Old Man Down the Road plagiarized Creedence's song Run Through the Jungle. And they are very similar.
So listen to the songs, and I'll tell you what my reaction was when this song came out.
Okay.
Better run through the jungle. Better run through the jungle. You got to hide it, hide. You got to jump and run.
When The Old Man Down the Road came out, I thought, that sounds just like a CCR song. But I got it, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's
Because it's the same guy.
John Fogerty. That makes sense that
Right.
he wrote the same melody. And I was like, all right, whatever. I didn't think anything of
Yeah,
it.
it sounds like a
course,
John Fogerty song.
I didn't realize when I heard that what had happened, the whole back deal of selling off
Well,
the catalog.
So he got sued, saying that he had played. That John Fogerty was sued for plagiarizing Creedence Clearwater Revival. He goes to court and goes, "Of course it sounds like me. I wrote and sang both songs.
Right.
Like that's just my style."
This whole trial, please tell me it lasted what?
Not
4
very
hours?
long. He countersued. Now, at first, the case was dismissed, and they're like, "Yes, this is stupid." Initially, the judge dismissed his countersuit as being frivolous, but then that was upheld. Eventually, he had to go through court again and got $1.3 million in
Which is
attorney's
essentially
fees.
attorney's fees.
Right, yeah. He had
So
to
basically, the
pay
only
$1 million
person
to prove that, yes, I sound like myself. No, I did not rip myself off.
And in the end, the lawyers are the only ones who really got
Right.
anything out of this.
Right. The other one, so he sued for sounding too much like himself. The other guy got sued for not sounding enough like himself. Neil Young, one of the most iconic rock stars of all time.
Sure.
His whole career through the 60s and 70s, he had been on Reprise Records. In the early 80s, he left Reprise to head to David Geffen's new Geffen label.
Right.
And the lure of that was that, first of all, he was offered a $1 million guarantee up front for every album. So he made $1 million just by putting an album out.
Sure.
Didn't matter how it did.
This
And
was
also-
this was early on with Geffen.
Right.
So
He had just signed Donna Summer, who we've already talked about.
right.
So David Geffen was trying to really build this label, and he was, because obviously David Geffen has very deep pockets,
Mhm.
he was snapping up every A-list artist he could get. So Neil Young was a big coup for him in the early 80s. And the other thing Neil Young wanted beyond the $1 million was complete creative control and final say. So basically, Geffen said, you can do whatever you want, and I will give you $1 million. The problem for Geffen was Neil Young did whatever he wanted.
Right. And it wasn't enough like
It didn't.
Neil
so
Young for Geffen anyway.
You think like, they call him the Godfather of grunge because he was that kind
Sure.
of,
Like gruff. sort of.
gruff and like, Heart of Gold and Old Man, Needle and the Damage Done, Hey Hey My, all these like kind of early grungy rock songs. So 1983, his first release on Geffen is an album called Trans, and this is what that sounded like. It was a synth album with heavily digitized vocoder vocals. That was Neil Young's voice.
What in the world was Neil Young trying to
So-
accomplish here? Because I'll tell you right away, the first thing, who's the person you thought of when you played that clip? I thought of
Roger Troutman?
No, more recently, I thought of Andre 3000.
Oh, yeah. Somebody just going,
right,
doing something completely left
different.
turn. Right. And the thing was, there actually was a reason he did this, and it sort of really put you over on Neil Young's side. It wasn't just, I'm bored and I want to play with synthesizers. So his son, Ben, has cerebral palsy and was unable to speak. So Neil Young had been trying to work through how to communicate with him.
Right.
And this whole album was a conceptual thing about, in the computer age, the difficulties of communication, even as communication gets easier.
Right.
Which is why you deliberately can't really understand his voice in a lot of things. He was trying to convey that. David Geffen was having none of it.
Right. David Geffen said, I give you $1 million to do a Neil Young record.
Yeah. And he said, in the lawsuit, it said it was, the album he turned in was deliberately uncommercial and unrepresentative. Meaning, basically, I want you to sound like Neil Young, and you sound like a flock of seagulls. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
And the album did not do very well, unsurprisingly. Neil Young also wanted to have a bunch of videos to go along with it, which might have sold the concept and the story better. But Geffen was furious and was like, I'm not paying for that. Like, I agreed to give you the $1 million. I'm not paying for your video.
Contract that says you're going to pay him $1 million,
So,
and that he would have creative control.
yeah. And he did what he wanted to do.
Right.
So the suit was eventually it was dropped because you can't sue him for not sounding like himself. Inherently, whatever Neil Young does is going to sound
Neil
like
Young.
him because he is Neil Young.
Right.
And eventually David Geffen apologized. Like, he realized I was wrong.
Wow.
But he's trying to get this label off the ground. You think,
Sure.
I'm going to come out with this rockin' Neil Young album, and I get that.
The way to look at it, if you're David Geffen in any label, right, is maybe it's just a lost leader. Okay,
Yeah.
let the guy do his one album,
And-
and we're not going to make money on that one, but the next one he'll do.
Well, the next couple they did progressively worse, honestly. He went back to more of a rock sound,
But he sounded
but by
more-
then the relationship was soured. So
Right.
Neil Young was not going to be giving his best to David Geffen. The funny thing is, once he finally got out of that Geffen contract, he went back to Reprise Records
Mm-hmm.
and came out with This Note's For You, and then his album Freedom, which had Rockin' in the Free World on it.
Which is
Sounds like a Neil Young song.
right.
Classic songs, and that's what David Geffen thought he was paying $1 million for.
So you're saying that David Geffen probably isn't inviting Neil Young to his yacht these days,
Probably not. I don't know if Neil Young would
and I don't think Neil
go
would
on the
accept-
yacht.
Right.
But yeah, I think there was a lot of love lost in that one. Moving on, I'm gonna do quickly.
This one is good because we're getting into hip hop now.
We're getting into some hip hop because things get really sketchy. In the early days of hip hop, it was sort of like the early days of the internet. Like, it was just the Wild West, and you could do what you wanted.
Right.
Like most hip hop albums, the samples on them in the '80s, they weren't cleared.
Right. You
Nobody
just-
thought about that.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm just playing a little bit of a record. Who cares? Well, Gilbert O'Sullivan cared. He was an Irish singer, had a song called
sang
Alone Again Naturally.
the saddest song in
The
the
saddest
history
song.
of songwriting.
Yeah,
Just
the song starts with him like treating himself to jumping off of a tower,
right.
and it goes downhill from there. It was a huge #1 hit in the early '70s. Biz Markie, who did Just a Friend, classic song.
Yeah.
Biz Markie sampled it on a song called Alone Again, which is the same
Okay,
title.
right off the
even.
bat, you're
And so he had asked Gilbert O'Sullivan for permission to use it, and Gilbert O'Sullivan was like, "No."
I don't like it.
So he did it anyway, kind of like Kanye.
Mm-hmm.
Gilbert O'Sullivan sued, and it was the first lawsuit to go to court over a hip hop song sampling something else. And I remember at the time, Gilbert O'Sullivan, because, Biz Markie fans they were young enough to not really know who Gilbert O'Sullivan was, who was this square old white guy who hates hip hop. And he was really vilified, Gilbert O'Sullivan. But the thing is, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
Biz Markie just straight up took his whole song, looped the piano, and rapped over it. You got to pay for that.
Yeah. And he did.
And he did.
And
I
he did.
loved, because Biz Markie always had a sense of humor. His next album was called All Samples Clear. The cover was him as a judge and the defendant, making sure you got it all legal and clean.
And as a result, that's what hip hop's, from that going forward, everyone cleared their samples.
Or they just used less of them.
Or they used less of them, or they took the chance and they usually ended up having to pay.
Yeah.
Diddy.
One that didn't make it to court of that same early 90s. You remember a rap song called Ice Ice Baby? Obscure little tune. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah.
So this
rings
one,
a bell.
It's Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. It's the bass line. We're going to play a little bit. I know you know these songs, but just listen to them together. This is Under Pressure and Ice Ice Baby.
And honestly, listen if you can, because there
is a subtle difference.
Is there a subtle difference?
There is.
Okay, well, let's hear.
So Vanilla Ice, the quick legal story of that before we get to one of my favorite sound bites of all time, is that Vanilla Ice did not clear it, as hip-hop artists didn't do back then.
Right?
And
this is right around the same time as
Biz Markie. I think, yeah. And so Queen and David Bowie came and were like, no, that's ours. Yeah. And they settled this before it ever got to court. Right. So eventually, Queen wound up getting 40% of the song, and Freddie Mercury, all the members of Queen and David Bowie are listed as co-writers.
Right.
But when not the lawsuit, but when it started coming out that, hey, you didn't clear this, and Queen and Bowie aren't happy, Vanilla Ice did an interview with MTV, and he tried to explain how he shouldn't have to pay anything because they are completely different. And this is what he had to say to defend it.
Great soundbite.
It's not the same bass line. Like it goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding ding ding. That's the way theirs goes. Ours goes ding 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 diggy ding ding, ding 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 diggy ding ding. That little bitty change. It's not the same.
That's not just one of my favorite sound bites in music. That is one of my favorite sound bites in the history of humanity. Theirs goes ding 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 da ding ding. Mine goes ding 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 da 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 ding ding.
Let's say he's right. All right.
He is, one of the bass notes in the second part is slightly looped. There's a little stutter almost.
This is classic. If that were true, and you're saying it's true, that's interpolation. It's
still a sample. He still took the song. You can chop it up and add extra parts. You're still sampling it. It's the actual original recording. This is like the kid that, now you just go to Wikipedia or whatever, have AI, just do your homework and you change a couple words around.
Right.
You're going to get caught. You still you can change one word or add an extra "the" in there, but you're going to get caught.
The good news about that is we would never have gotten that soundbite if Queen and David Bowie didn't go after him. So thankfully they did.
They should have.
Got that soundbite.
I love you. Remember the story that Vanilla Ice has always told? Allegedly, it's true. We don't know. This is Vanilla Ice's version that basically Suge Knight wanted Ice Ice Baby and threatened to throw Vanilla Ice off a balcony while they were standing on a balcony.
Dangled
him.
He
didn't sign it over. So there was an Adam Sandler movie called That's My Boy years ago, and Vanilla Ice plays himself in it. And Adam Sandler says to him, like, you must be so rich with all those royalties. And he's like, man, he goes, Queen took 40% and Suge took the other 60%. I owe money every time that song gets played. It's like, that song cost me money, which might be true. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But
I don't know. That's, Vanilla Ice. Well, you heard him explain. You have to believe what the man says. Those are two different songs. Suge was going to throw him off the balcony.
Well, of course. Never mind what we hear. You're right, Ice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Jumping up into the 21st century here.
Uh-huh.
This one it was significant because it was over 3 notes. Like the George Harrison thing was a wholesale.
Right. Like you said, there were chunks of the song where you could hear it.
There are changes in the song that are the same. It's beyond coincidental at a point.
Right.
Or with, the hip-hop songs, you're literally sampling and taking an old record and creating something new out of it. This one, it was Tom Petty and Sam Smith. Sam Smith, 2014, his song Stay With Me is a huge, huge hit. Mm. And one thing it doesn't really sound like is a Tom Petty song at all, except for one particular one and just for 3 descending notes. So this is Stay With Me and Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down.
Oh, won't you stay with me? Well, I won't back down.
It's just the dun, dun, dun. It's the 3 little notes. That's it. And so Tom Petty.
Okay.
And his
I don't
publishers.
want to say that someone's being petty,
Oh,
but
you did.
but I did, and actually that wasn't a shot at Tom Petty,
Right.
R.I.P. It is because he actually didn't really care about this much.
Not
This
that
was-
much.
This was the publishing company that came forward.
And Tom Petty, like, it was his publishing, and the quote he said about it, he was not like Gilbert O'Sullivan seemed kind of perturbed with Biz Markie.
Right.
Tom Petty, not
it
so
seemed
much.
personal with
Right.
Gilbert O'Sullivan.
Tom said, "All my years of songwriting have shown me these things can happen. Most times you catch it before it gets out the studio door, but in this case it got by. Sam's people were very understanding of our predicament, and we easily came to an agreement. And what the agreement was is that Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne, the other writer of I Won't Back Down, were added as co-writers on Stay With Me, and they got 12.5% royalties.
Right.
And the funny thing is Sam Smith denied ever even hearing the Tom Petty song and his
Which-
co-writers.
Which
It's
probably
possible.
this is totally possible. Not just age difference, but genre is completely different.
Right.
Like
That song is before Sam Smith's time. He's British. I
Right.
don't know. I don't
these are two.
know how
artists
huge
you-
Tom Petty is in Britain.
Yeah, these are not two artists that you would expect would sort of bump into each other
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form.
Like, I don't think Sam Smith grew up and like, man, I really love Tom Petty. I mean, maybe.
Right.
He probably knew who he was, but I don't know that he was like, yeah, we are ripping off I Won't Back
Right.
Down. And that one, it's such a minor, it's literally just 3 notes.
It just
How do you
at
avoid that at
some
a point?
And this is what I don't get with all of these is if you have, and this one didn't go to trial,
Right.
they just reached an agreement.
Because they realized Sam's co-writers and himself and the publisher were like, oh, you know what? We didn't do that on purpose, but there's definitely it is similar.
Right.
So they just were like, here you go.
It reminds me of I don't want to drag Beyonce. Far be it from me to drag Beyonce, and I'm not dragging
Oh,
Beyonce.
I just want to be clear. It's you dragging her, not
I'm
me.
not. Let me restate. I
Charles,
am not
why do you hate
dragging
Beyonce?
I
Why are you
love
kicking the beehive?
Beyonce. There are people who have recently accused her, or at least her songwriters on Texas Hold'em, of copying or being inspired by the theme song to a cartoon called Franklin,
Yeah, it's a
which I'd
Canadian
never heard of
cartoon.
before.
But I did look. It was a Canadian show. It was big in America too, apparently for Gen Z kids. The 2 co-writers of Beyonce's Texas Hold'em are Canadians born in the '90s,
Right.
so they would probably
They
be very
might have
familiar
heard
with it.
And again,
that one's-
this one it seems like much like the Tom Petty case here, like inspired by. And
Well,
why isn't inspiration? There has to be space for inspiration in music. That's
not anymore. That changed because of the next one we're going to talk about here.
All
This was a
right.
huge one. Everybody remembers this. The estate of Marvin Gaye versus Robin Thicke and Pharrell.
Yep.
It was Blurred Lines, Got to Give It Up. And this one, before when the song first came out, Robin Thicke in interviews was saying, oh, my all-time favorite song is Got to Give It Up. I told Pharrell, like, I want to do my version of that song.
Yes.
They wanted to create
I remember hearing that interview, and I remember hearing him saying that, and there was something in the back of my head that said, "That's
You're gonna
get-
regret that."
That's going to get him in trouble somehow." And I don't know why.
it's-
Maybe I'd heard enough legal, copyright lawsuits at that point that I thought that's something that you probably shouldn't have said on the
Right.
record.
But you'd think because he'd be safe. Because all he said was, I was inspired by that song to do my take on it. And it is clearly very inspired. There's a lot of production elements. Like listen to these 2 songs and you will hear they are very clearly, and one is inspired by the other.
Right.
I mean, that is obviously the vibe they were going for.
Honestly,
They're not
but when
the
I
same
hear
song,
it, it's
though.
not the same song.
They
I mean,
are not.
the percussion is very similar, but okay.
Well, that's
percussion.
and what they were sued over, like Tom Petty and Sam Smith, again, it wasn't a lawsuit, but what the thing there was, it's the same notes and same progression.
Right.
They were sued for having the sound and feel. So you can be sued for feel, and Robin Thicke lost that case.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is a lot of people who had no financial stake in this at all weren't necessarily friends of Robin Thicke. Over 200 artists signed on to a brief for an appeal of this. People including Hall & Oates, Jennifer Hudson, members of Earth, Wind & Fire, Fall Out Boy, Tears for Fears, very different artists from different eras, different genres. They said, the verdict in this case threatens to punish songwriters for creating new music that is inspired by prior works. So basically, if you're influenced by something, you have to pay.
It may cost you. I never understood this because the songs don't sound. Yes,
It's
like you
clearly
said,
influenced.
Clearly
There's-
influenced.
That's not a secret.
Yes, but at some point, I don't know, and it ended up costing them a lot of money.
Millions.
It screwed Robin Thicke. Pharrell. I mean, Pharrell's fine,
Or else fine.
but I think if you're Pharrell, doesn't it feel like a black mark on your
Yeah, it was embarrassing to him
songwriting
because
career?
he was specifically asked to kind of come up with this version, a modernized version of "Got to Give It Up," and he did, and people loved it. Blurred Lines was #1 for 12 weeks. It was a massive hit.
Was it 12 weeks?
12 weeks, very big song.
Yeah.
And now he could never do that again. And
Right.
partly, I think so the next thing I want to look at, the last one here, it's also involving Marvin Gaye. Oh, this wasn't directly his estate, with Ed Sheeran. And it's the similarities, and this one is not so much the sound and feel as the actual progression
Right.
between Marvin Gaye's "Let's Get It On," one of the most classic baby-making songs in history,
Mhm.
and Ed Sheeran's song "Thinking Out Loud." So just
Which
listen to
is,
these,
by the way, which is a new age baby making song.
kinda, yeah, and but listen, like they are very similar songs.
I've been really trying, baby. We'll be loving you till we're 70.
And on the surface, they're not as noticeably similar as Blurred Lines had been with "Got to Give It Up," but you hear
The
it.
bass line
It's
is
very similar.
Yeah.
Ed Sheeran won that case, and Robin Thicke lost. Part of it, I think, is likability, because remember, that's
Yes.
partly why Robin Thicke was so humiliated in public as marriage was falling apart. In
It
that
was a bad
trial,
time. He wasn't.
he
very-
said, he was like, I was drunk and on Vicodin through the whole thing. I don't really remember it. He kind of threw Pharrell under the bus. I think people just were not sympathizing with him, but they love Ed Sheeran.
They love
Cuddly
Ed
little
Sheeran. And by the way, during the case, and this one went to trial, he played guitar on the stand. Well, once you have the celebrity that everybody loves and they love his music and he's filled stadiums around the world, and now he's going to get on the stand with a guitar and just strum a little. Let me play a little something for you, jury.
It's unfair. Like, that's why
Now they're all going,
Dolly Parton won her 9 to 5 case back in the 80s because she got on the stand and played her fingernails as percussion, like as a washboard, and sang 9 to 5 on the stand.
Right.
Well, I love you, Dolly. I'm not going to rule against you.
I wish there was a cutaway of Ed's attorneys once he was playing. They're just sitting at the desk.
Yes.
And he ends up winning.
So the songs are very similar, but in Ed Sheeran's defense, and also just to show that how similar these were, same as how Robin Thicke said up front, I'm inspired by this song. Ed Sheeran was performing a mashup of "Let's Get It On" and "Thinking Out Loud" in concert
On
before the
stage,
lawsuit.
Did it.
He would
right.
be playing "Thinking Out Loud" and then just keep playing the song and veer into the lyrics of "Let's Get It On." But in his defense, it is a very common, simple chord progression. And after he won the verdict, this is what he had to say about it.
These chords are common building blocks which were used to create music long before Let's Get It On was written, and will be used to make music long after we are all gone. They are in a songwriter's alphabet, our toolkit, and should be there for all of us to use.
He's not wrong.
Not
Because
wrong.
the
Because if you
elements
take
that make
that
"Let's Get
away-
It On, Let's Get It On" are not really in "Thinking Out Loud." Like the Marvin Gaye-ness of it.
The Marvin Gaye-ness.
That. It's just Ed Sheeran's version of that same progression.
I agree with Ed that if you take away those, what happens is that you're not going to get pop music the way you get pop music. Like there's a reason that, as you said, songwriters use those tools. Those progressions sound good, they feel good, and and it's the hook for so many songs. And now you're going to take that away. Now pop music isn't going to be what it is. And
We've heard the medley of, I forget the exact progression it is, but it's the one that "Don't Stop Believing" by Journey uses. And there's these comedians who do this like 10-minute long thing of all the songs that use that same progression.
right,
The songs don't really sound alike exactly, but it is literally the
same
same progression because it's just simple.
I just think, like I said at the beginning of this, what's the answer? Nobody freaking knows because it's a
No.
different, you get a different, depending on if it goes to court, depending on the judge, depending on the jury. I mean, to me, the Ed Sheeran song sounds more like the Marvin Gaye song than the Robin Thicke and Pharrell song sounded
Right.
like Marvin Gaye. Yet they lost, he won. It just depends on what happens, how it plays
Right.
out in court. And like you said, likability is a big part
It does,
of it. too.
and yeah, and it is kind of scary for artists now, like what Ed Sheeran was alluding to, and what the people in the Robin Thicke verdict were saying. Like, we saw Dua Lipa, her song "Levitating." She got sued because these people are like, "Well, we put this song on SoundCloud." Well, yes, and those are very, very similar songs.
Yes.
I don't know enough about that one to say she did or didn't. But now anybody can be like, "Well, I put this song online and it got 14 listens in 2006." Well, with the internet, you can't even claim plausible deniability at this point.
It reminds me. Back when GarageBand came out,
Yeah.
that thing on Apple, I created a song that's out there I'll bet you somebody's probably stolen my.
Wait,
If I knew a
did you
lawyer,
sing on it?
Yeah,
Did you sing? Or
I did not sing. On it. It was instrumental. It's
Hunt down that
instrumental.
Hot Charles track.
I got to go find
It'll
it.
be our new
somewhere.
theme song.
It wasn't that good.
And you will get sued. Right.
Exactly. Well, that's going to do it for Get to the Hook this week. We will see you again next week with another hook.
Right.
All right.